Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Cyber Vigilance podcast. So, today's topic, we're going to be talking about the email risks in 2024, what we should be looking out for, what's changed in the last few years. And with that, I thought it would only be fitting to have our special guest join us from one of our latest partners that we've signed up, which is Egress. So today I'm joined by Jack Chapman, VP of Threat Intelligence at Egress. Jack, thank you very much for joining me. It'd be great if you could give us a bit of an intro to yourself, your role, and anything else you think we should know.
Really happy to be here today, Katie, and talk about such an important and sort of pressing topic. So my role within Egress is sort of all around email security, but really it's about understanding what the bad guys are doing and how they're targeting organizations. And from that, deciphering the best ways we can to protect organizations. And that's including the people, the technology, the policy, and make sure it works end to end for our customers. As part of that, as you'd imagine, we sort of learn quite a lot around, okay, how do criminals actually function? Like, what's looking left of a phishing email or email attack landing in inbox? What's happening before that? And how do we go from someone deciding to attack you to actually being attacked? And what does that look like going beyond that?
Mm-hmm. Great. That's an amazing introduction. And I guess it ties in very nicely to what we're going to be talking about today. And not just looking at blanket the protection, but also like, why do we need to protect? What things are changing? And looking right at the very start of the attack, like what are the attackers thinking? Why do they need to do this? So on this podcast, we're going to be referencing a few statistics from your latest phishing trend report for 2024, because there's some really interesting topics within that I think a lot of people maybe don't consider. But before we kick off with that element, I wanted to, like you said, start from the beginning. So from your perspective, what do you think are the main reasons and drivers behind phishing crime at the moment? Because obviously phishing, as we all know, is one of the top attack vectors and has been for decades now. So yeah, what's your take on that?
I think in this specific area of cybersecurity, we're almost victims of our own success because sort of we as the broader collective, we've done a really good job of moving the needle on cybersecurity. We're doing things like patch management, password management, upskilling our staff, sort of get those fundamentals that sort of even 10 years ago would almost be sort of the whole mission. As we've done that, what we've essentially done for the criminals is made it more expensive and difficult in both time and money to perform some of the more technical attacks. Then on the other side of it, technology has changed as well. We're going into sort of cloud-first world where everything's interconnected through a single login. And because of that, criminals have been like, fantastic. How do we get keys to the kingdom? Through your sort of cloud identity, which, funny enough, is very closely linked to email. So it's always the classic, isn't it? Of, do I want to spend above sort of $500,000 per exploiting a technical 0-day, which someone could patch tomorrow, or should I just manipulate and ask someone for their password? And then the first step of any attack is always the hardest. Mm-hmm. So that's really why we're still seeing phishing and email being so relevant today. Is humans are still humans. And criminals have realised actually you can get the best sort of return on investment by targeting them still, rather than some of the other approaches.
Yeah, 100%. And I was going to say the exact same thing about the amount of effort it takes in that kind of performing those really technical attacks versus the reward for them, the money they're getting from that in comparison to, let's say, a simple invoice fraud attack against an unsuspecting employee that doesn't really understand and isn't able to tell the key things that they should be looking out for, versus getting really technical with it and having these sort of really long stage attacks that, you know, people are dormant in your environment for months before they actually kick off an attack, and they're doing things in the background. Whereas email, it's perhaps, I guess in a way it could be less successful, but there's more of them. So yeah, the return on investment for the attackers is massive. And like you said, humans perhaps haven't changed as much as technology have. We're still ingrained with like our behaviors, and technology is still new for a lot of employees. They still don't understand, and we can't expect them to. So yeah, I think they're all incredibly valid points. And also cybercrime as a service, it's becoming easier for attackers to carry out these attacks, because there are organizations that are within the criminal world itself that are performing these attacks on behalf of other people, like pay as you go almost. It's yeah,
100%.
it's
And
crazy.
you touched something really interesting there, because it does, just to get my soapbox out for a moment, it's still true that sort of Hollywood still portrays cybercrimes as a teenager with a hoodie in the bedroom, and sort of this,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost a sort of damaging image for us sort of trying to protect people, because the reality of it is anything but that. Obviously, you've got your script please down on the bottom end of sort of a sophisticated pyramid of actors. But this is full-time, multi-billion-dollar businesses around the globe, and it is truly global. Because why
Mm-hmm.
would you attack people in your backyard at times? Attack someone outside of your jurisdiction? But it is that point of, imagine for all of this, there's all of the business processes we all follow, even going back to like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats for a particular operation. The criminals are all following this in order to perform these attacks. So it really is, the sophistication is not just in the technology they're utilizing, but the methodology of how they go about, how do they find their targets, how do they follow up? Is it a bulk campaign versus a targeted attack? And they all go down to return on
Mm-hmm.
investment.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And it, yeah, like you said, people perceive hackers as maybe just like a single person in their room, but it's not. It's an entire business that is building billions each year. And I think I was at an event the other day where they said about the projected income for cyber attackers in a few years is going to be in the trillions. It's crazy how much it's evolved, especially over the last, well, since COVID, really. I've always mentioned it on this podcast, but since then I feel like it's just skyrocketed, and I have to mention it because, yeah, it's been a massive impact. So I think, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about some of the statistics within the phishing trend report. I pulled a few out that I wanted to discuss with you and get your take on them, because I personally found them quite interesting. So perhaps the most important one that I picked out of there was that when you're looking at multi-stage email attacks, looking at what that second stage is once you've performed that first initial phishing email. And it's mentioned that Microsoft Teams is now the most common next step in a phishing attack, which has risen by 104% since 2021. So it just shows that attackers are diversifying what that second stage is, compared to in 2021 when it was SMS was the one of the biggest next steps. So why do you think that is the case, that it's changed from SMS to Microsoft Teams?
I think the biggest reason why is because how organised communicate has changed fundamentally. Teams is very often viewed as
Mm-hmm.
an internal product. It's fantastic. I need to talk to Katie in a different team to do a finance transfer. Oh, our team, sir. And because of this, it's a psychological element of people view it as safer, where you're always warned of things coming
Mm-hmm.
outside of your organization. Watch out for emails, especially. It's always seen it in the training for decades around this. If attackers just shift it by one step into a different solution, it's a whole new game. It's suddenly changed entirely. It's
Mm-hmm.
similar to where we've seen rise of QR code fish. You're always taught not to click links,
Mm-hmm.
but over the whole COVID era, especially, we were all trained on a societal level to scan all the QR codes, do the tests. This is good. And attackers are like,
Yep.
fantastic. All of these people have already been trained to do these things for us. And it's exactly the same with Teams, where essentially, because it's part of normal life of decisions being made on Teams, trusted sources being communicated on that internal level, if attackers can hijack that, it's easier to spread internally. But also, it's newer technology. There are still gaps in it, as we know, and going forward. And it's the classic where one door closes on criminals, another's open, where organisations taking more control on sort of the smishing side, on the sort of third-party device side. We've matured that as an industry, which is fantastic. And we've almost forced the attackers to do something new as well. So it's a couple of different factors which is really driving it. But if I was predicting what's coming forward, I think especially more attacks going down that vector. Maybe not the initial penetration, but once someone's
Mhm.
successfully harvested credentials, that's probably going to be an easy way to propagate.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it makes sense. It is the natural progression of that next step and what seems more legitimate, because everyone gets the typical SMS about, oh, you missed a delivery and you've got to pay for a redelivery. Like everyone's kind of aware of those, and yeah, using Teams and that kind of thing. Obviously, it looks like it's legitimate, and I know Slack has been a big one as well. I think it was the Uber compromise, which originated from Slack. So you're starting to see a lot more high-profile compromises all come from these collaborative applications that people have within the business. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's going to move a lot more in that direction, and there's going to be more security tools as well, protecting those applications that you use, because I think in the past everyone just assumed that they were locked down and you're good to go, but yeah, definitely not the case. So the next one, which I particularly was interested in finding out why this might be the case. So in the report, it references word count. So in 2021, the typical word count of a phishing email was 238, whereas in 2024 it shot up to 853. And it's something that I wouldn't normally think of. Um, but I guess, yeah, I wanted to get your take on why you think that word count has dramatically increased.
There's sort of three main reasons why, and it's really interesting to see sort of just on a structural point of view how fish evolve over time, because it really is a bit like how you see families of malware evolved, especially in sort of the 2010s. Sort of they're all built on top of each other. Same with a lot of these phishing techniques. The two biggest driving forces, though, are partly through compromised accounts, where people have quite extensive signature blocks, which add several hundred words on by default. Fantastic credibility,
Mm-hmm.
being able to say, look, it's coming from a legitimate source, either impersonated and spoofed, or actually I've compromised someone and their email servers quite handily add a signature on for me as an attacker. The other sort of big driving force for it, though, is the payloads of phishing emails are changing, sort of going away from attachments. And even when we talk about attachments and malware, we're sort of seeing it where a lot of attachments actually now contain links within, because the primary driver for phishing is credentials nowadays. That is the go-to return on investment. Um, but the other key thing that's changed on the payloads is actually, why don't we sort of get an action out of this directly? So rather than trying to sort of infect someone with malware or steal credentials, let's ask them just to do something. It's the payload this attacks. Either can you give me some
Mm-hmm.
insight into your business, either because I want to target someone specifically, some IP theft, financial transfers, quite a broad range of asks you can have on a human level. And especially as people are quite often taught, watch out for malware, watch out for bad links. But if it's people's job to be helpful, going back to the psychology principles again, it's like, hang on, so I'm just trying to be helpful. Someone's just asked me a nice question. It seems quite benign to me in my
Yeah.
non-security role if I say where our servers are hosted. But from a criminal's point of view, it's fantastic. You just saved me 3 months of work. So
Yeah.
that payload, this evolution is definitely on the rise, and we're seeing that across all industries, really, which is really quite an interesting trend. And as you'd imagine, in order to build a more compelling story, they're doing things like putting in fake previous mail threads, especially in financial frauds, where they show the previous conversation and say, "Oh, I was talking to this person in your business. They've asked me to come and talk to you to finalise this financial transfer," and it's all spirit, it's all fake in that
Mm-hmm.
regard. So it's all of these factors building up that have shifted that average word count by so much.
Mm. Yeah, and when I first read that statistic in my head, I was like, but why? But it makes complete sense. Like you said, a lot of it is just around asking a simple question on the back of having these legitimate seeming elements to the email, like the signatures. And I think from my perspective, what I've seen with customers over the last year is the invoice fraud element to things, of asking people specific things around that rather than injecting malware or anything like that. That has been a lot more common. I mean, I've witnessed customers have hundreds of thousands of pounds worth sent to a fraudulent account through that supply chain compromise. And yeah, there was no attachments involved. It was just through a simple conversation. And it goes back to that return on investment side of things. Nothing technical has actually happened here. It's a conversation. And yeah, I think that's incredibly common at the moment. And potentially when I'm speaking to new customers, one of their biggest concerns, because they've got all the technical tools in place to be able to block malware running on a device or that kind of thing. But how are you meant to stop just a typical conversation where someone's compromised your supply chain? It's a lot more difficult.
So I was going to say, it's interesting you mentioned supply chain, because I know one thing we said in the report is that sort of shift where in the previous years you've seen a lot on the compromised account basis because it makes sense, it's a pre-built element. But what we've definitely seen going forward is, hang on, rather than just using a random person's account, there's a pre-built path into people's organizations through supply chains here. And it's really quite interesting because from a supplier, you've got the credibility, and from that human element again, there's that source of trust implicit in place. So it's another way that sort of the ecosystem's changing as well.
Yeah. I think one of the other areas that leads quite nicely on from that is around traditional security in email has typically been a secure email gateway or just Microsoft itself. And there's been a lot of attacks that are able to bypass those things that you have in place, like your SEG and Microsoft or Google. And we always, and I've spoken about it before on this podcast, about how a SEG is now no longer enough. And obviously you reference that in the report that there's been a 52% increase in the number of attacks that have bypassed a SEG, but also that there's been a 50.2% increase in bypassing Microsoft. And a lot of people just rely on Microsoft itself. They ignore the SEG. They're like, yeah, we're Microsoft. It's good enough, but it shows that it's about the same, really, which I thought was interesting, and obviously shows where security needs to be. You can't just rely on those things. I don't know whether you've got any insights into why a lot of email attacks are coming straight through Microsoft itself.
It's quite interesting, sort of that dynamic between the SEG and Microsoft, where Microsoft really is encroaching more and more into sort of the SEG space and using a lot of the same approaches to stopping attacks. Attackers love it because, great, we only need to solve one puzzle and not two puzzles because they're doing quite similar things overall. But I think sort of the core reason is sort of the general approach to the problem, where it's still very reactive in nature, where it's like fantastic, specific IP addresses, specific block lists, reputation based, where we can just compromise someone to get around that. And a lot of the building blocks we've relied on, or Microsoft and the SEGs have relied on for the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years, have been quite dismantled by attackers now. And we're sort of seeing the impact of that. I think the other key driving force is the speed in which attackers are working because of automation, because of a lot of the new technologies. They can sort of just move faster than they can be defeated and shut down. Where it's within 5 minutes using pre-built technology, they can get a sort of a brand new novel 0-day attack out of the door. And they know in 24 hours that's going to be blocked worldwide, but they would have already massively made a return on investment. So they don't really care. And I think it's this change in sort of the rules of engagement, essentially, which is where, unfortunately, Microsoft and a lot of the SEGs are sort of slipping back away from where the attackers are.
Yeah, and it's always kind of been that process of blocking the known bad, rather than being able to understand more about that email. So like for example, the invoice fraud doesn't necessarily look bad. There's nothing for a SEG or Microsoft to latch onto to say, oh right, this has got a dodgy attachment in it, or the sender's domain isn't right, that kind of thing. It's a lot harder for them to pick up, and like you said, attackers are just so quick to create these new approaches that we definitely need to consider a more layered and advanced security tool for your email, because Microsoft and your SEG just can't keep up. And I think it kind of segues quite nicely into the next thing I was going to talk about, and that being the layered approach with a Microsoft or a Google email solution. So talking about what the next step is. So obviously, Egress, you provide an integrated cloud email security solution. And I think I wanted to pick up on why these kind of solutions are more likely to pick up these threats than, say, a SEG.
Absolutely, it's really coming at it from a different angle, where you see a lot of SEGs and Microsoft start their security lives in sort of anti-spam, sort of trying to sort of do that. Okay, this is known bad, where a lot of the ICS, ourselves included, come at it from sort of using the new tools in our toolboxes, all of the sort of AI, ML approaches of understanding what is phishing in general, what is malicious content, and that generalization. And the other sort of key approach is actually, rather than just relying on sort of a known bad attachment or link, we're sort of looking at it much broader scope of understanding the content of every email in context of this specific user, in addition to what's normal for the organization, what's that in relation to the payloads as well. And it's the classic element of the more data points you can pick out and have those all talking to each other, you just have it's a completely different game, where a lot of the older incumbent solutions are just saying, is this one bad thing there? Yes or no? Is this other bad thing there? Yes or no? And it's just sort of a more simple approach, which historically worked really well. But as attacks have added that evolution, it's become harder. And then I think the other thing that's really shifted is, unfortunately, phishing isn't just a technology problem. It's that sort of true blend of technology, people, and policy together in every organization. And then the criminals are actually targeting the three of them in one go. As such, any technology solution has to enable the human and work with them on that, as well as enrich the sort of security position of the business from a policy and broader technology point of view as well. And I think that's very different to some of the incumbent approaches to the problem.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I quite liked on the element that you touched on there about the context of an email in that first point, because it really nicely links back to everything we were talking about at the beginning about understanding that main reason and the initial reason that an attacker would be trying to get into an organization. It's all about understanding their mindset, and almost with email applying a zero trust approach to it, where instead of relying on known bad, you're looking at, well, what's actually good, what's normal. And I think, like you said, that's the direction that we need to go to be able to understand what the typical conversation you would have with someone is. You know, who are they? Have you spoken to them before? What are they asking from you? Do they know what your typical process is for something? It's all about just looping everything together. Without hindering productivity of an employee, right? Making sure that they still get everything that they're meant to receive, and not, trying to look out for all the dodgy emails. So, I know we spoke about that just before this podcast about technology versus productivity. And I think that definitely applies to email security massively, because, you don't want to be getting all these spam emails, for example, or, having everything so locked down that you can't get on with your normal job. Because email's everyone's like main point of communication within the organization and with customers and that kind of thing. So, definitely agree with all of those points there. So we also mentioned just then around this is going to be a big one, I think, AI and using AI for good in email security and being able to determine the context and the content of an email. But what do you think we're going to see in the future as attackers start to learn about these new email security tools and using AI to be able to determine these kind of things? Do you think we're going to start to see a even longer staged phishing attack with multiple contact points? Is that the way you think that it's going to start to go?
I think it is going to really affect it in two main ways. We've got the automation or sort of the breadth of attacks where actually they can make every attack more tailored automatically. So almost the basic level fish becomes more sophisticated and sort of more targeted and sort of being able to automatically scrape social media in order to pull in key information. And especially where we talk about on the training side that actually a more tailored training leads to better results. It's the same on the attackers. The more tailored their attacks is, going back to human psychology again, it just makes sense. I think where it becomes a bit more worrying is actually not just in being able to speed it up for the criminal or basically make existing capabilities easier for them. It's what new capabilities can some of this technology unlock. Something we're seeing a lot of this year actually is around deepfake technology, of being able to do voice notes, being able to do Zoom calls, where we've seen attacks where employees will get a Zoom call from their CEO. They go onto it, and there's a deep fake of their CEO on the call with them in live time.
Yeah.
And I think this really starts to unlock a new paradigm of security. Of we've gone from in the COVID era, if you like, of going, is that a real background? Is it a fake background? It's going to go, is that a real person? And that's
Yeah.
another level. People just need to be aware of it for sort of the first one. And it's varying degrees of success currently, but we've definitely seen toolkits which are being sold to make it easier for the less sophisticated criminals already in this space. I think just the last thing in terms of what criminals are going to be using this technology for. Because I know when we talk about AI and phishing, people often think, great, they're going to be making phishing emails with it. And that is part of it. But where we've seen more danger, if you like, is actually in the reconnaissance stage. Being able to find targets and pull together information about them and sort of a value of almost like a sales qualification step of, is this person worth targeting for a more advanced attack? That's where a lot of the recent LLM progression and sort of large data models has really had a quite significant impact.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen like videos of people showcasing how like your chat GPTs and stuff can create that email based off, say, you show them, oh, this is my recent conversation with so and so, create an email asking for this with the similar typing patterns and all this kind of thing, and it's just so quick to do it. And
Yeah.
I also love that you touched on the deep fakes there as well, because I was looking recently into this, and obviously people saying around deep fakes about podcasters, and it made me think, is someone going to call my boss and pretend to be me because I now do this podcast? But it's crazy that it makes you think about all these things that you're doing in your daily life and how that's going to affect you from a security perspective. Maybe it's just because I work in security, but I'm hyper conscious of that.
And but just I think you raised a really key point there, especially talking to your boss, because if you think one of the core policies we have, especially in sort of a financial control sense of always talk to the person to validate the request for a financial control action. Hang on, how do you know that's the real person? And it's, I think we in security are sort of the forefront spearheading sort of, okay, there's these new risks we need to manage. But it's definitely one I'd advise sort of having those early conversations, especially with sort of leadership within organizations on the landscape is changing here. And some things that worked really well for us in the past, we might need to reconsider.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that links in quite nicely with like conversations that I have with customers where obviously they might have bought a technology, say 3 years ago, and it was good at the time, but it's just not enough now, and trying to showcase that. And this report perfectly outlines how much can change in just 3 years. It doesn't seem like that long of a time. People sign 3 years 3-year contracts for security tools, but so much can happen within that time, and you have to be able to react quickly and change your mindset on how you should approach things such as email security, because I would say AI based email security tools have only really taken off over the last like 5 or so years, and a lot of people aren't aware of them still. So it's being able to understand and learn about all these new tools that you can utilize to support you while not kind of bashing your previous strategy that you had. Yeah, you just have to be able to evolve as the attackers evolve. So I think to close this off, because we've covered quite a few interesting statistics here, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from some of these statistics? Because I think from my perspective, it's all about understanding the risk and how it's unique to an organization. No one is the same. And I think for me, it's about having tools, process, and ensuring that your people are up to date on latest attacks and that kind of thing in a unique approach. Everyone is different and everyone's behavior is different. So I don't know whether that's an agreement or if you have a different takeaway from this report.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, because it really is the case. Like, we talk about best practices as an industry, but at the end of the day, every organization or even every individual have a different threat profile of what do they need to protect the most, where are their crown jewels, who's attacking them and why. And at the end of the day, I think just the only thing to add is, because the attackers are evolving so quickly, it is important to reflect and sort of say, okay, I know we went forward with the strategy even sort of 6 months ago. It's very healthy to actually question that again, just because things are changing continuously. And it's not a bad thing, where in a lot of industries, it's like, hang on, why are we changing our mind after only 6 months? The difference in security is there's live adversarials who unfortunately are changing the game on their side. So we need to proactively change how we're combating them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect addition there. Completely agree with all those points. So I think that's everything that I wanted to cover today. I think there's been some really great conversation here around understanding the very beginning of attack and figuring out right to the point that it affects your organization, how you would tackle that. So thank you very much for joining me on this podcast today. I really appreciate it. Anyone listening that wants to download the report and find out a bit more about those statistics, as well as find out a bit about egress and what they can do, I'll leave all of those links for you in the description section. And yeah, thank you everybody for listening.